are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me, as usual, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing all right. You know, it's been a couple weeks since our last show. There's been a lot of really good hockey going on. There was a trade in the NHL today. There's been some coaching stuff happening. It's been a wild couple of weeks. We're here to dive into that. As we do, check us out on social media at YWT Podcast. Find us everywhere you find your shows, including sportstalkphilly.com. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Okay, so diving right in, I think we didn't really talk about this off the air. Usually we kind of run through what we're talking about, but I think we both know what the first story of the day is.
No, we do. I mean, it's pretty obvious what we have to lead off with.
And the crazy thing is, it's unofficial.
Well, it's all rumor and speculation at this given moment, but you have
rumors and innuendo all over the place. But
you have to you can't avoid the elephant in the room.
There is now enough smoke there where we can discuss the fire that is Matvei Michkov. Kevin, do you have a bit of a timeline for kind of how this all broke down, or stuff kind of came out in a couple different stages here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely off the top of my head, I'll try to go back and see if there's any point that I tweeted something about retweet or more likely retweeted, honestly, because there's not a lot of info out there.
Most of this happened, what was it, Thursday and Friday of last week?
Well, Sunday was really a big kind of thing or whatever.
Oh, you're right. It was as late as Sunday. Okay. Yes.
Well, that was when it started to feel like something was really potentially close, and that's now what everybody is watching for. I think, I got to go back a little further than this type of stuff for a second. It's another topic we're going to get to in a couple minutes. That involves a totally different player. But that was kind of the start of some weird things happening around the Flyers in the past couple of weeks. It was really, honestly, a relatively quiet couple of weeks from that perspective. I'm seeing I don't remember the exact. Actually, okay, now I just found the exact date of our last show. It's because I see where I retweeted that too, and I tweeted a couple things about a few of the playoff games going on. Couple of NHL news
later in the show.
A couple of NHL news pieces, things like that. Some other stuff that I'll reference maybe later in the show. That was on a personal note. We'll get to that later too. Some baseball stuff because I've been doing that a little bit too. And really the only Flyer news that I had, this was going back about 5 days ago. This was I guess last Thursday or last Wednesday, which is when the London Knights won the OHL championship and moved on to the Memorial Cup. So the key was, you have Oliver Bonk and Denver Barkey are going to the Memorial Cup. Actually, in the QMJHL, Drummondville won, and Alexei Gendron is on that team. Was loaned back after a brief little bit of time with the Phantoms earlier this year. So he's there. So now three Flyer prospects are going to be in the Memorial Cup, and that was really the basis of a lot of the news. Of anything. Then you had, this would have been last Thursday, the 16th. There was a story that we are going to get to in a couple minutes that's related to another player. And for a couple of days, that was really the basis of everything.
Yep.
And then somewhere along the lines, there really just wasn't a lot. I didn't retweet a whole ton about some of this stuff either, because there was just... how sensitive some of this can be. You know what I mean? It's very sensitive information when it comes to Matvei Michkov and kind of these things or whatever.
And really any Russian prospect.
Right. So you have to be mindful of things like that. And there really wasn't a whole lot to kind of go off of. And it was just kind of a rumbling thing about, is this possible? And it went back a little while. There was, I guess really the original timeline, now that I think about it, was before our last show.
Yeah, we mentioned some about rumors, it a little
bit. And then there was complete radio silence for most of the 2 weeks. Then you have what happened on Sunday, and the idea that now there is a Russian report that kind of indicates that there's a path to the termination of the contract. That really is what kind of set this thing off. And
by the contract, you mean the contract with
the KHL contract.
Right. Yeah.
Correct. Which completely 1,000% has to be handled by the player and his agent. Nobody else can get involved.
The Flyers
with that.
Cannot officially get involved in that process, right?
Which is why it's so hard to talk about, because there's nothing else that we can say from the Flyers perspective. The only thing that the Flyers have in this whole thing is wait and see if
player's rights.
Well, they have that player's rights from an NHL perspective. Wait and see if something happens. And if it does, come to the table with entry-level deal in hand. That's about it. I mean, there's nothing else that they can do before that, though.
The NHL blueprint is pretty laid out for a situation like this.
Well,
there's not a whole lot of wiggle room.
So I wanted, this is why, and we'll maybe get into a little more about the other player in a second, and I'll just mention it right now. There were rumors also going around about Alexei Kolosov as well.
Yes,
which we will touch on a little bit more in detail in a second. But the reason I want to bring that, the reason I'm bringing that up is because, so the Kolosov thing is what happened about 5 days ago, and it came out that he's not convinced about staying in North America. That was the report. It was coming from a Belarusian source and all that type of stuff, which leaves room. Again, it's like the Russian sources with anything with this. You do take it with some grains of salt. And all I ever say about things like this, like I retweeted something about that, and all I ever say is it's going to be something to watch. You're going to have to keep an eye on this, because it just doesn't, stuff like this should just not come from out of nowhere or whatever. But one of the things I've noticed a lot about some of this stuff is people want to almost make the Flyers like the Eagles a little bit, in a sense, where it's like every day there's got to be a talking point, and that every piece of news or every report has some grand significance to it, and that there needs to be some daily thing. And there's an element where that's true, where it's like, there's, because right away, one of the first things I put out when the Kolosov thing came out was there's never a dull moment. Like never a dull moment with this team. That something could be going right or wrong or whatever, right? But you also have to acknowledge that sometimes I think that we want to, and by we, I mean the fan base buys into this stuff, and I'm not trying to criticize the fan base for wanting to see successful things happen or for getting up in arms about something that could happen that's on the negative side. It's almost like, though, we have to overreact to everything on a daily basis. The thing that always has been not weird to me, but the thing that has always applied to the NFL and the Eagles in that sense is when it's 17 games in a season and every game really does hold that level of significance, and the day-to-day is so critical, and the year-to-year can allow for high turnover and going from being the worst to the best in short order. We almost try to apply those principles to seasons that have 82 games and sports that take, and leagues that take years to rebuild in and years to get back from one side to the other when you're talking about contention. Right. And that's the hard part with it. So everybody immediately sees the Kolosov thing and there's freak out levels. I had told what was the thing I kept saying when we did the last show and we were talking about Michkov. People are going to be salivating over the idea of he might come over. You know, like,
well, sure. They should be, for the record. Like, if this does come to fruition and he does join the Flyers this year, it does drastically change.
Well, sure, because
the state of the franchise.
Well, because I said it on air this afternoon on 97.3, and you just said it to me right before we started. This would be the biggest prospect they've had come up and be part of the team since Lindros. They haven't had a player with this level potential since Lindros.
And obviously, there's been guys that they've drafted high, right? You think of Nolan Patrick, you think of James Van Riemsdyk, but this is different. This is closer to kind of that generational, that Austin Matthews level talent. That there are elite players in the NHL, and then there are the best players in the NHL, and you know who I'm talking about.
Sure, well, and you hope so, right? Like there's
Michkov had the chance to do that,
right? There's no, and that's the point. There's no guarantees. There's no nothing like that. But you do have to factor in that that's the level of potential that exists with this player, and because of it, let's put it this way, you got to think about every aspect of this decision. You think about the player himself and what he could bring to the table in every possible way, but you also think about the idea that when we talked about this now, honestly, less than a year ago, if we're being honest, because we're not even up on a year since he was drafted.
Because he wasn't on anyone's radar for drafting him, not really, when the Flyers took him at 7.
Well, and that's another reason why and that's a great point, because one of the things it's not that he wasn't even on anybody's radar, it's the level of secrecy that goes into this. You really think you're going to know anything before the Flyers put it out? when they brought him to the team facility before he was drafted and nobody knew about it.
Nobody knew a thing.
Or that they worked out a deal to get, that as soon as Ivan Fedotov's contract was terminated, that next thing you know, it was what was it? 2 days after people found out about that he had
he was there
here, yep. Right? Like that quickly. That's how they've operated, and you have to expect that that's how they're going to operate with getting him over here,
right?
And part of that equation, is where the patience needs to be had with this situation. There is definitely an open line of communication going on right now between Michkov and the KHL in terms of what do we do about this, and and what's best for the player, and how, is there a path to making this happen? It's certain. One of the things that was talked about that's certainly not unreasonable is that if he does come over to play, it's NHL or bust. You do not. There is no AHL option here. You're either going to play him at the NHL level or you're going to send him back to Russia. One or the other. So,
almost like a juniors kickback that we've seen players have before, where you don't have the option of playing in the AHL, you get kicked back.
But you know where that comes from. But you know where that comes from. They know how good he can be. Whether
of course.
For as much as they jerked him around with, the idea of, he's playing for CSKA St. Petersburg, but no, he's not going to play in these games. We're going to hold him out of the lineup for these. And when he does play, he's going to be the 13th forward or a fourth liner or something in that, before finally they actually loan him to a team that's going to play him top line, And
then he had the best draft plus, and then he had the best draft +1 season in KHL history. Okay.
Right. And that's why I highlighted the part where it's like he played for they weren't a great team. He was the best player on the team, and they didn't have they didn't exactly have KHL playoff hopes, but that's what you're seeing the potential. And you think about the Flyers lineup in general and you go, if he's got enough skill, and I don't know, look, one of the things I want to be cautious about if he does come over is I don't know how 5-on-5 is going to translate for him exactly, because
valid.
Different rink dimensions, different styles of play. He's going to have to learn, right? Like there's going to be,
of course.
But you're not going to tell me that you don't stick a guy like that on your top power play and say, let's just, run wild.
We'll figure it out. Right.
Run wild. I mean,
let's
remember you've had the worst power play in the league 3 years running. You put him on your top power play unit.
And there's a lot of first round picks that you cannot do that with. Not in their rookie year, not their first year in the NHL.
The question came down to also about the other guys in that draft who did go on to play right away too, like your Bedards and Fantillis and Carlsons, right? Like there were other players that were good enough to be in the NHL from day one, and there's no doubt that if his circumstances were different, he would have been in that category probably.
Yeah, people said going into that draft that if geopolitical borders and other professional leagues did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
And we were ranking these players in a vacuum, he would go probably second.
Right. And I'm a little more generous with it. I say second or third, probably.
Second or third. Sure.
And it's generally speaking, right? Like, but the fact of the matter was, and that was why the Flyers even bothered with this, right?
But this is not your average first round pick. This is not a good player. This is potentially an elite, top of the NHL type talent.
But that's why the Flyers go there, right? Is that when everybody else sees the status of what a Russian prospect looked like at that time and wonders what's the future look like, the Flyers were able to sit back and go,
Danny Briere, not only are we taking the Russian kid, we're getting all our other Russian kids over here early too.
Well, not even that part of the equation. It's just they were able to sit back and go, realistically speaking, at that moment, sitting there on draft night, before we know everything else that's happened since, do we have 3 years? Probably. So why the hell not take a swing?
Absolutely. And that is a status that not a lot of general managers have.
Right.
But when you just took over and the last guy was so bad that he got run out of town after the trade deadline because he was that inept.
And think about something. Okay. So think about something with what you're talking about also. Think about forget the other teams and certainly the top three. Okay. Because the top three, as soon as you factor Michkov's situation and they wanted somebody immediate and they got somebody immediate.
Jarmo Kekalainen didn't have the time for a Matvei Michkov pick.
Right.
Yeah.
San Jose did the same thing in terms of, okay, we'll take Will Smith instead. Everything was trending that direction anyway. But think about Montreal and being in that position. And Montreal went safer route. Take the guy who you know what the status is, kind of thing, right? And there were thoughts that they might go that direction, and they maybe had, but are they closer to it's got to happen sooner? Did they feel like they had 3 years?
Probably
maybe not. And then certainly you think about who picked 6th, and you go, what was going through their minds when it happened? Because that team doesn't exist anymore.
You know
what I mean? Like, so who knows what the deal with that situation was?
They were playing in front of 4,000 fans.
Well, exactly. And not only that, but like people speculated, was there a possibility that Michkov at that time, thinking about that situation and not obviously not knowing what was going to eventually happen, is like, I don't want this.
I'm not going there.
Right. Like he very much expressed from day one, I wanted to be, a Flyer. And you hope that's true. You certainly think about the part, that comes into play. But this is okay. So this is what I'm also talking about. I'm tying this together now, because this is what I'm talking about with the Eagles style stuff.
Okay.
Because literally maybe 2 days before this other report about, it's possible there's discussions, they're looking for a way to maybe terminate this contract, all that type of stuff. There was a story that came out about how could Michkov be Cutter Gauthier 2.0. And people want to drum up this kind of drama when there's no basis for it. Like
my brother, come on.
But it's like, but you get where I'm coming from with this. Like, what the hell is some of this stuff? And I'm not trying like, listen, is there, and you know where it came from too, of all things? The exact same problem you have with this whole thing. This is why I tell you tread lightly with this stuff, because everybody's doing this off of what? A report out of Russia says, or look at these comments from Roman Rottenberger or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like
now, see, at this point, there's been 4, 5, 6 statements that all kind of say the same thing that lead you to believe that we have something here. But off of the first 1 or 2, I understand where you're coming from for sure.
Well, no, just hold on. So it has nothing to do with the comments coming out of Russia. I'm saying people are then having to translate a Russian article with what they said as to what it's supposed to mean.
Right. We had some miscommunications on the first line, and
and people were pretty easily able to deduct what that really meant, which was NHL or bust.
Team.
You play in the NHL or you don't. End of conversation. But people took like the article I'm referring to took something that Danny Briere said in a French interview about which, by the way, he could be totally bluffing. That we don't know. Yeah, you don't know.
He didn't know Fedotov was coming either until he showed up in Voorhees with a duffel bag.
Right. Just all I'm trying to say with that stuff is just remember how much they've kept under wraps in the last 365 days.
Listen, it's been a tight ship since Danny Briere got there. One thing I do want to talk about with Michkov before we kind of move off this is how it does change the direction of where the franchise is and where the franchise is going.
The impact of the offseason. Absolutely.
Right. You talked about, this guy coming in and, what it does to your lineup, where you put him on your power play, if this guy is the real deal, if he is the next, Matthews level player, if he is an elite player in this league,
right.
You have 3 years where he's making less than $1 million. And then if he is the player and then if he's the player we all think he is, he will make a lot more than $1 million on his next deal. Mm-hmm. So to a certain extent, you do kind of have to make some hay while the sun shines here if you are getting 3 years of a generational talent on an ELC.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, what does this do for a lot of things too? Because obviously, I don't think there's anything else. Look, I'm not going to put anything past Danny Briere if this happens or anything like that, because then Danny Briere's really just been really, like we said, he's really good at keeping stuff under wraps. Let's just say that, even the negative stuff, because he even kept Cutter Gauthier under wraps until it was done,
Who wants Cam Atkinson in a 2nd round pick? Here, you can have it.
Well, this is what I wonder, though, to an extent, because what if your biggest acquisition, no matter how you spin it, because you could run down the list of free agents, trade candidates, I don't care. Well, is it possible that it doesn't matter who you could run down, that Michkov's still the biggest thing that you could bring in no matter what?
In a salary cap world,
considering what he makes, it probably is, right?
Exactly. I think he is your most valuable acquisition dollar for dollar, no matter what.
But my point to that is that, so like there was a, like I saw something today, I believe it was Anthony DeMarco, who had something about they're going to keep Cal Peterson. They're not planning to buy him out, which makes total sense, by the way.
I agree.
While you have your goaltending situation at the NHL level mostly seemingly figured out with Erison and Fedotov,
you just eat one more bad year on that contract.
And you bury it. So it's not even $5 million. It's like 3.5, I think, is what it is.
It's like 3.65 or something like that. Yeah.
And even so, don't stretch, like, as much as it's cheaper to buy him out. And I think it's 1 million this year and 2 million next year is what it would be. So it would technically be cheaper. Do you really want right? Do you really want to carry a second year of cap just because you don't have? And it's not like, and to be honest, it's not like they don't have a use for him. You would still have to get a player like that to be a backup goalie in the minors in some capacity, right?
Well,
so to that point, what about Cam Atkinson? Because Cam Atkinson's a possible buyout candidate. But if you have a player who's like, consider if you will, what if Cam Atkinson is going to be nothing more than a 13th forward this year? Do you feel the need to spread the cap hit across 2 years because you don't want to have that player on your roster versus the fact, versus, hey, you know what? He can be kind of a reserve in case somebody gets hurt, in case this, that. The only reason that you do anything differently is if you cannot find a trade partner for him and you want to honor his request to find another place for him to play.
Well, that's totally
the only reason. That's the only reason. But otherwise, do you keep him?
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, Cam. If you really want to go play somewhere else that bad, let's terminate the contract.
Well, they wouldn't. I don't think that's an option.
Sure, it is. If they mutually agree to terminate, Well, no, they can mutually agree to terminate outside of a buyout window. He just doesn't get paid for it. How bad you want to go play somewhere else?
Well, I don't ever see a world where that would happen, though, because it would be so rare.
No, I agree.
So, but my point is that do you do
couple things on Cam Atkinson. If he's your 13th forward this year, I think that's entirely fine, because I talked about that 3-year window out of Michkov.
Mm-hmm.
The first year, you're not really as prepared for it as we've kind of talked about on this show, being prepared for the Michkov window.
Well, especially if it is this year.
If it is this year, right. So the first year is going to be a bit of a transition year anyway, as far as your cap goes, as far as Michkov getting used to North American ice goes, all of the above. So at that point, you chalk the year, you let Cal Peterson's deal run out, you let Cam Atkinson's deal run out. You know what I mean? Like, you just get these nice, clean, off the books done. And then you move forward with 2 years and you really try to maximize your cap space, as the cap is theoretically jumping at that point anyway.
Well, of course. And that's the argument that's to be had, right? Is that they've got a lot of money tied up going into next year without doing anything.
Yep.
So what do you do? And how do you address, like, look, obviously, one key chunk of the money that's tied up right now, when you look at the total cap, is what am I going to say? Because I feel like,
are you going to tell me it's the Tony DeAngelo buyout? Because I'm still annoyed about that.
Well, no,
frankly, because I'm still mad at Chuck Fletcher for making that trade in the first place.
Totally valid, by the way. No, that's not what it is at all, because the DeAngelo buyout is 1.67 million. It's not like, as bad as that still sounds that they're going to have to pay it, it's not what's the huge detriment. No, the detriment is that at the given moment, like before you get into the season, it's the $6.25 million that Ryan Ellis gets that's LTIR eligible. But that's where you free it up. You know what I'm saying?
I believe with LTIR candidates, they're sitting at right around 6.8 million. In terms of free,
well, because think about this for a second,
and they have some deals to get done.
If you consider, and this is a really big deal, if Michkov comes over for this upcoming season, that means that all 3 years of his entry-level deal, you will also be dealing with that $6.25 million for Ellis. That's when the contract finally ends.
Yep.
At the same time that Michkov will be due for an RFA contract.
Presumably a big deal, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and
now there's plenty of there's plenty of other things on here. Like, you've got other guys who are not tied up with anything right now. That like you got to make some decisions, do some things, you know.
Well, and you got some phantoms who might be ready to get a shot. And
you got to ask, and this is why you got to ask yourself, you know, because again, one of the other contracts that's going to be brought up is they still have 1 year at $4 million for Ryan Johansson, who probably isn't going to play.
Well, and if that's the case, he would be LTIR eligible.
Possibly an LTIR fan. But this is the point that people are trying to make, is that if you sit there and look and go, Cam Atkinson may be nothing more than your 13 based on the way this is going. You've got Ryan Johansson making $4 million toward the cap that is possibly buried on LTIR also, but also you get the point. Like it's 1 year.
It's still there. You got to think about it. Right.
And you go to something like, you know, not really the defenseman, but you go with all these other possibilities. You have like we said, the Ellis one. Cal Peterson's got that 1 year left at $5 million technically that you could bury to make it, like we said, 3.6 or whatever. 3.85 is what it is. I have Cap Friendly up now to actually confirm that. But you get the point. And what happens when 5.87, I think it's 5.87 for Atkinson comes off the books and $4 million for Johansson and technically 3.85 for Peterson? Like you're opening up. Look at all the money you're opening up, and you still have the 6.25 every year right now that you could put on LTIR right at the start of the year. And that's a lot of money that in a year, if Michkov's the big thing now, in another year, because I'm going to tell, like, let's say, what do you think people are going to start talking about? You already brought up one thing, which is, or one option that's going to be out there a lot, because people are going to sit there and talk about Mitch Marner if he's a trade candidate and making a splash in that direction. The thing that I'm thinking that you could, like, and I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying I expect it to happen, but what talks more than anything? If you've got the money and you can throw it around a little bit, it will talk. And who's a free agent after next season?
After next season, big names.
Oh, it's a huge name, and I'll give you a hint. He's still playing.
Oh, okay. I was like, he's still in the league? Okay, great. No, you meant like he's still in the playoffs.
He's in the playoffs right now.
Oh, there's no way Draisaitl's hitting the market. There's no chance that Leon Draisaitl.
I'm not saying that. And if that's the case, so be it. But you know, people are going to take it a direction where it's like, hey.
But if Edmonton can't sign him, they may have to trade him. You got to trade him to somebody.
Well, and it's
hey, Leon, do you like orange?
Well, they wore it a lot for several
years.
That's what I'm saying. They went back to the classic. The classic that's more behind me. But you get the point. Like, people are going to take it to that level if Michkov's here, especially if he's already been here for a year and gets his feet wet. Right? Like, if he has a full season under his belt, and then you sit there and you go, hey, who's on the free agent? Like I don't get, like, let's play the free agent card this year instead of wearing, like, because Marner's the name that gets talked about from a trade perspective.
I don't think they want to lock Marner's money up.
Agreed.
Marner's term.
But like,
for the record, I do not think Marner makes sense to the Flyers.
I don't either. And
just wanted to put that out there.
And so let's go back to, okay, so instead it would be like saying, and again, this is somebody I don't expect to be, definitely don't expect to be a Flyer and don't really expect to see anywhere else either. But it would be like saying, okay, now we know Michkov's coming over, go out and get Steven Stamkos. Because it changes the dynamic now that you have Michkov over there. I don't think you go that far in year one, because I think it's too dangerous to start throwing all of your whatever little free money you have right now. I mean, like this is where, to me, if you know Michkov's coming over, you start to you either explore all of the trade options that you have, or you get very serious about the Travis Konechny conversation. Okay. Is he long-term? You know, like if you can envision a world, because Travis Konechny plays right side a little bit more, right? And Michkov's more on the left side. So if you can envision a world where those two guys are your wingers on a top line for a while, maybe you do it. And you say, we're not wasting time on Konechny then. We know Michkov's coming. Konechny's eligible for an extension on July 1st. Do it. Get it done now, before it gets too late. But if you don't know he's coming, then you have to go back into the evaluation process, right?
Okay, I'm going to put you in the Danny Briere chair.
Oh, here we go.
It's July 17th. Michkov's coming. He's here. He's whatever. He's on your roster.
Yeah.
Edmonton calls.
Okay.
and says, "We have a center that you may like."
Yeah, his name's Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah. And he's willing to talk to you, and he's willing to sign an extension at whatever, a market value number. I'm not going to nitpick it here.
$11 million, let's say.
12 and a half.
He's making 8.5 already. I'm going up at least 2.5 to 3 million easy, right? Maybe more.
If Draisaitl's not making 12, the NHLPA should file a grievance.
Possibly. You're probably right about that.
Yeah, let's say 12, 12.5. All right,
12, 12.5. All right, I'll go up 4 million.
Because if he makes 12.5, that's what Connor signed 5 years ago.
Right. And full disclosure. So let's back up for 1 second with what you're saying, because what you're telling, so you're going off of,
you're getting one last year of Draisaitl.
Right, they're giving you a call saying you get Draisaitl for 8.5 for 1 year.
And he's willing to sign it. Correct.
And the extension would be signed, I guess, effective immediately upon the trade.
Pretty immediately. Yeah.
So that you know that you have him long term beyond the year, and it's not a negotiation process. Gotcha.
Correct. Frost, Bonk, your next 2 firsts.
Ugh. You had me in the beginning of that.
And I think that's probably something where the conversation starts. Now, if you're getting Draisaitl as a 1-year rental, I don't think you give up quite that much.
No, but you started
your extension on there.
You genuinely had me when you started with Frost, and then let's put it this way: I wouldn't trade Oliver Bonk for a lot of players. I probably would for Leon Draisaitl,
and that's why he's in there, because that's the kind of thing you're going to need to move.
Do you know? Okay, can I tell you what? And this is where you're like, maybe this is where you started to lose me. You went 2 firsts. The fact that they have 2 firsts in 25 would make me think about one of them.
Your next 2 firsts.
No, I know. No, I'm saying, but you have 2. So you would still have a first round pick in that 1 year. It's the second first of your own, because that's all they have, obviously, in 26.
Yeah, but at that point, if you have Draisaitl and Michkov in full swing, presumably you're not worried about that pick.
The only reason I'm worried about that is because of the fact that, to me, I need to know what else I could get to round this thing up, because I'd still have concerns about the back end. I still don't completely know whether or not, the
Edmonton Oilers are in the conference final, right?
Yes, I do. I know they are. Oh, I know. And no, that's what I'm saying.
A lot of it is due to that Leon, that guy.
No, I know. The hard part with that also is that, so again, it comes down to, you know what? Here's another reason why I wouldn't go that far with it. The way that you just presented it makes it sound like there's a little bit less leverage for Edmonton than you think. Because if Edmonton's calling and saying, we can't do this, he'll come to you, 8.5 mil for the 1 year that's left, and 12.5 for the next 8 years,
right? Because
that's what it would be, right? Presumably.
Yeah, and yeah.
He's willing to do that. He's not going to sign with us. If that's in the conversation, he's not going to sign.
Well, even if that's not what it is.
They lose some leverage, and I don't think you need to throw 2 firsts at him. Maybe then at that point, it's 2 good prospect, or a good NHL player, a prospect, and a first.
So if that deal's on your table, you say no if it's 2 firsts?
I don't love it. I'd have to. The hard part is that, you know what? My answer to that would be to be determined, and I'll tell you why. Because you said July 17th.
Yeah. After everything's played out.
If you let me see how the draft this year plays out, if I really like the direction that they go with the draft this year with 2 picks, and I really like the direction that
I'm curious if this is going to make you more or less likely to take the trade, because do you want them to be good faster, or do you want them to have 2 more draft picks?
You want them to, what you should want is whatever you think is going to equate to more long-term success. And let's put it this way. The big difference between the 2 players that get talked about the most when it comes to trades that you've brought up, Draisaitl and Marner, is I've already said it on here from last show. I don't think Mitch Marner can be that guy by himself. I think it works better when he's got a supporting cast. Now, Michkov's a great player, and maybe that brings
you can argue it's not even working that much better.
Well, and possibly. I at least look at Draisaitl and I say, you know what? Some nights, I've seen him be completely on and take over the game. And
I watched that man put up 30 points with no legs,
essentially,
in the playoffs. And I watched Alex Pietrangelo take an absolute battle axe to Leon Draisaitl's arm,
and he still delivered, right?
Yeah.
And let's not forget also, by the way, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the McDavid-Draisaitl combo. This is their second time in a conference final. How many conference finals has Mitch Marner been to with the rest of those guys? It is what it is. If the knock on you is you can't get out of the first round, you're super talented, but you never get out of the first round. At least McDavid and Draisaitl can say they've been to a couple conference finals. They've been there.
By the way, how much is the last year of Marner if you were to trade for him?
That's a good question.
10.9.
And just imagine,
and he doesn't play center.
And this
like, come on, man! Like, come on, man!
This is what I'm saying. So yeah, it's $10.9 million for that last year, and then you're worried about right. You're worried about going from 8.5 to like 12.5 for Draisaitl.
Mitch is worried about making Marner's going to make $1 more than Austin Matthews.
No, you know how that's going to work.
It's
going to be 13. Hold on, what's it gonna be? It's gonna be $13,250,000, $50,016 because that's his jersey.
Right. Oh my God! Stop with the jerseys. Okay.
No, you brought that up.
I know.
I know you hate it, but you brought it up last year because that's exactly how that stuff goes, and you know it.
All right. We have a little bit more news. We have a little bit more news to get into before the playoffs. I think that is a good spot to put a pin in Michkov for now.
Real quick to Kolosov.
Yeah, we'll know by our next. Well, we might not know by our next show, but we're not going to know about Michkov until the press conference.
Pretty much, and
that's when you'll know for sure. You may hear things beforehand. You may hear that he was spotted in, Belmar Wawa or whatever. But
it's a good joke. You got to give.
Don't believe it until you see him on the stage with Danny holding, whatever
a number 39 jersey.
Right. Okay, on Kolosov real quick.
Well, one more quick
thing
on the Michkov thing really quick too, because I think we said this last time as well, but the goal is to have a resolution. I mean, I don't think the Flyers even want to deal with this if we're getting close to the draft. Like, you either know by mid-June, like in another month basically, or you don't, right? Like, or not you don't. It's either you know that he's coming or you know he's staying, and that's all there is to it. And if he's staying, so be it. It's not. No
big deal. Big deal.
Let's make clear this is not necessity. It would be nice. It would be a great thing for. Can you only imagine the second that this comes out? First of all, not long after the draft happens, if this is able to happen, he will be at a development camp, which is going to bring a giant crowd to just see him. I don't normally end up making it over to development camp because it's midsummer and it's kind of a busy time and all that stuff like that. I don't usually get over there. I probably am going to have to make a visit over to the training center to get a look.
They might have to get him back out to Stone Harbor one of these years.
Possibly. But that's all I'm saying is, like, you'll get an answer soon enough on this because there's no way that everybody's going to wait around trying to figure out how this is going to go.
Right.
Simple as that. Let's get to Kolosov.
Yep. Real quick, Kolosov, the news came out. I think you said it was last Wednesday or Thursday. There were some speculations from some overseas sources that he was maybe considering going home.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. There's rumors that he's homesick. There's rumors that he's not adjusting well. The problem with some of that is that, so you tell me who, it was basically already April when he was just coming over to begin with.
Right.
You tell me, you moved recently. Are you adjusted?
Honestly, I'm doing okay, but I have also moved several times in the last several years. Right. And also I'm 31 and my frontal cortex is theoretically fully developed. And we're talking about a literal child here. Right.
About a 22-year-old. I got you. And that's all I'm saying. Like I move into a house a couple years ago and it takes like the first year to get fully adjusted to everything. Yeah. And not because you're not settled with your stuff or anything like that, but you're doing things around it too. Oh, we got to paint this, we got to fix this, we got to do this, and it takes time and you are adjusting. And on top of that, this is supposed to be a professional athlete who's going over and also trying to learn how the game works in North America after playing
also it's different
life in Russia.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So it's an obvious adjustment. I would certainly hope that he's not just giving up on that after 3 weeks time.
You would think.
I don't buy because there was a lot of stuff thrown around about this too. I do not buy that it has anything to do with the fact that they played Cal Peterson for the Phantoms in the playoffs. That was probably predetermined. You know what? Okay. And this is the thing. And this is a self-admitted thing from John Tortorella because Ian LaPerriere is not John Tortorella. Ian LaPerriere is not a madman who is going to throw somebody who just showed up into a meaningful game like that. And John Tortorella admitted that he was nuts for that.
Yeah, but he didn't really have much of a choice in
No, he didn't.
defense.
But you could understand if he sat there and went, I don't have a choice. I got to just sit back. No, he goes, you know what? I do have a choice, and I know it's crazy, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's my gut, and I go by my gut. Right?
John Tortorella is ready for any game to be a Disney movie. But yeah, if
only Fedotov had skated all the way out to center ice and took the mask off, and all of a sudden you realized it was your
it would have been great.
All of a sudden you realized it was your guy who invented the knuckle puck.
I was gonna say, how's his knuckle puck? But I chalk this up to a kid who was probably a little homesick, who hopefully gets to go. I think I texted you. Send him home for 6 weeks. Let his mother nag him that he's got to keep his room clean. And he'll be ready to come back over and live in his own nice apartment.
Well, in fairness, by the way, in 5 days it turned into, well, they have no idea about any of this, and it doesn't sound like there's anything to it, and all that. So carry on. I mean, like, again, it's one of these things where it came out from overseas. It's
right.
Like I said, look, is it worth keeping an eye on going forward? Of course, because I don't think that comes from completely out of nowhere. But sure. I also don't think that this is some, again, why, think about this. Why would you sign an entry like this? It almost ties back to the Michkov thing too, where it's like, if he gets out of that contract in the KHL and comes over, you would assume that his purpose of doing it is, I want to be an NHL player and I'm here for this and I'm willing to go through it.
People who think Michkov doesn't want to be a Flyer, like, he is paying, I think I saw somewhere that it's the equivalent of roughly $300,000 if he were to buy $400,000.
$400,000
if he were to be buying himself out of this contract, and that is his own money.
I think it's really interesting. But so, by the way, I think it's really interesting how, because for the most part,
a lot of money, dog.
No, for the most part, that's what we thought, right? They keep tying. The thing is that you can tie in, like, the agent can be tied into this as well. So collectively, the two of them come up with, and that's why they say it's a negotiation, because Cheska St. Petersburg wants to make a little something off of this. If that's the way
Russia.
It's going to
be. Everything's a negotiation.
Sure it is, but you also get my point. Like, they want, like, a little, the value of the contract is $400,000. There's no guarantees that that's actually what he's got to pay to make it happen. They can sit there and go, well, how bad do you really want it? Let's make it $700,000 and almost double the contract value, because if you really want out and you really want to try this, especially when you consider who operates that team.
Hello.
Just saying. Just saying.
As usual in Russia, all roads lead to one place.
Pretty much. But that's the thing about Kolosov. Like, Kolosov's here, and I just don't know. Like, again, it would say a lot to me if he wants to leave. It says a lot about him. It would say a lot about the organization that there's another player who's asking to leave. Certainly, I hope that this is not anything to this, and it kind of blows over a little bit, like it seems like it's going to, because it's not like I don't see a plan for him. He's probably your number one starter in the minors next year, which is a perfect place for him to get started.
And frankly, probably the year after as well, unless he plays well enough to surpass Erson.
Sure. To be honest, by the way, this is where Cal Peterson, I think, comes in and is actually a value, because Cal Peterson's been a good sport about this whole thing, about being sent to the minors, about, you're not going to be the number one guy. It wasn't going to be that way. And he's been a really good sport about that. And I think that Kolosov could learn a lot from that attitude.
I think Cal Peterson is a great guy to play the Saturday afternoon games in the 3-day AHL set.
Or either that, or
he's the perfect guy.
Or what you're talking about also is the finale. That's like the evening Sunday game,
or that one,
or the 3:05 Sunday game that you're like, or you're right. Maybe it is the Saturday night and you split the Friday and the Sunday, so it's a little bit more of an NHL schedule style thing.
Kolosov's going to get a lot of Fridays.
You're really at that given moment, you're really grooming Kolosov for an NHL style workload. Yeah, I mean.
And maybe he's down there for 2 years. In the first year, he plays 1 out of every 3 or 1.5 out of every 3. In the second year, he does do a little bit more of that NHL schedule.
But
that would be probably ideal for him.
But again, it's all rumors and things like that, and you gotta you got to just go with it, like I'm going to be very big this offseason. And I guess with the Michkov thing too, this kind of comes like, let it play out, let stuff play out, and let's not jump to conclusions too early until we actually have some more firm details about some stuff.
Do we have firm details about our next story, or is it too soon? It just happened. So, details are still developing. We're not really sure, but it seems as though the Flyers won the Stanley Cup 50 years ago this week.
Yeah, no, we have plenty of firm details there.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we had all our facts lined up on that one before we started talking about it. As mentioned there, the Flyers' first cup was won 50 years ago this week. Obviously, as of right now, the biggest moment in franchise history. The first non-original six team to win a cup.
Sure. So not to go back to the Michkov thing, but there were a lot of people drawing parallels to really the story about Michkov comes out on that day. Like, why was the report on, like, the report was Sunday, May 19th, 2024, 50 years after the Flyers first won a Stanley Cup. Huh.
So funny. The Flyers will forever be tied to Russia.
Is that kismet? Is that supposed to be what that, like, is that kismet there that, that was pretty the day, that otherwise the only thing, like, seriously, wasn't that pretty much before we did this show, that was almost the only Flyers thing we had coming to the table was it's been 50 years since the first cup win. That's about it. And it was pretty much the only story I sat down and wrote in the last 2 weeks. And sure enough, like, there's also these rumblings.
The last 3 days happened.
Well, I didn't write anything on it because, again, there's just not a lot firm going on. Like,
fair enough.
People know what's out, what's going on to a degree. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, it's a major milestone. They kind of already touched on this a little bit. When we did the shows during the season and the alumni game happened before the Mark Recchi Hall of Fame induction, they had the living members of the 1974 team come out. Pretty much all of them, by the way. I mean, like, that whole team pretty much came back for that, and they brought the Stanley Cup out with them. And we talked about it. We said, like, Orest Kindrachuk couldn't help himself. He picked it up, like,
of course,
and it was awesome. Like, it goes back to, and I've written about this enough times. It's a big enough piece of history that anybody who is a Flyers fan should know what these words mean. I've said them multiple times when we talk about this team, but when you put together, what Fred Sherrow put on the blackboard that day, win today, walk together forever, and they are,
Oh yeah. Well, and I will say it's a little bit of unfortunate. Like, the child in me kind of hates how much the alumni have taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of years. Because for some of them, certainly not all of them, but for some of them, there was a little bit of, how can I miss you if you won't go away? So for me, it's a little like, yeah, it's nice to see some of the guys who don't show up as much. It's nice to see whenever Ben Wilson shows up to one of these things. But in the meantime, it's like, I don't really need to hear from Clarkey or Homer or Barber or any of them. One of the people to me that, like, I think fits into that category really well because he's not around all the time is and this isn't 74, by the way, because this doesn't count towards 74. You're right. Okay.
No. But when Reggie Leach comes back, it's like, that's a cool, when you can get, and then
absolutely,
and then you kind of welcome the, and Clarkey and Barber are here too, because then the LCB lines together, and it's like, okay, it doesn't happen every day that you see Reggie Leach around, is the point.
I agree, and that's fair, but I still kind of look at the other 2/3 of that line and go, yeah, Leach didn't mess around in the front office for the last 20 years, so.
and there are others on the team that didn't either, that you can still
of course
that have been around, that you kind
of whenever Dave Schultz shows up, we're gonna love it. Come on.
Well, and I think that way of Bob Kelly's always there and Joe Watson's always been there, and it's like, does it, but they don't have anything else to do with the front office part of it, so does it matter?
Right. No, that's fair. And those guys,
honor the history. Let them go and shake hands with people. It's great. Bernie does that too. Bernie's like that too.
Yes. And then, obviously I assume we'll talk about this next year when they do the 50th anniversary for the second cup, and, they drag all these guys back out again.
It's not going to be the 50th in in a couple days when that anniversary hits again. It'll be the 49th, obviously, this year, but that's, it comes up on you really quick. Like these two anniversaries are very close together. By the way, because I brought this up today because again, not to tie it all to Michkov or whatever, but they want a resolution sooner rather than later. And I sat there and I said, like, when, like with the off season type stuff, when are the important dates of the off season was kind of like a question, right? Like when's the bulk of like what they would do if they know Michkov's coming, when would it happen? And I brought up the fact that the final day, the listed final day of the Stanley Cup final is June 24th this year. It keeps getting later and later and later. Think about the fact the Flyers won their first Stanley Cup in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup final on May 19th. And I get it. The league only had 12 teams. Actually, no, it wasn't 12, 16 at the time. They were part of the first 12, and then 4 more were added up to that point. But still, like, isn't it crazy to think about, like, May 19th? The other one was May 27th. Like, you don't, now you don't even, you used to at least even be able to buy Memorial Day. You would get to, the Cup final has started. Nope. We're not even going to be there. We're going to do we're going to do our Cup final preview show, and it's going to be June.
I was going to say, and that's our next show in 2 weeks.
Roughly,
Right. So we do have one other bit of news here before we get into the playoffs. And funny enough, it also involves some Flyers alumni here. Some guys who will one day take their place in kind of the old retirement home of Flyers alumni. First bit of news here. Rod Brind'Amour has signed an extension in Carolina. It is believed to be a 5-year extension. It is believed that all his assistants got 2+1, 2 with a team option for a 3rd year.
It is the least shocking news ever.
So
I know, as much as there was talked about that there was like some stuff, and Brind'Amour, I think, even said it himself. He was on, I think, Jeff Marek's show, and kind of said it got a little tight at the end.
Well, when you get swept out of the Eastern Conference Finals last year and come out and say, well, it was a close series, and then you come out this year and you go out in a similar fashion where you're losing close games. And I know they won a couple and made it interesting, and for a second it looked like they were going to do the thing and come all the way back and blah blah blah, and then the heartbreak collapse in the 3rd period. Like, to me, if Rod was ever he wasn't even going to get fired. That's the thing. Like, his contract is up. This is how you get rid of Rod Brind'Amour without firing Rod Brind'Amour. And if he didn't go now,
I want to see the reaction if it would have happened, though. Like,
it's crazy that, the Leafs didn't finalize Berube, which we'll talk about here in a second, until Sunday evening, when Brind'Amour really started to crystallize in. Like a lot of these teams, there's still a lot of coaching jobs out there. And I think a lot of that was because you watched the Carolina Hurricanes go down 3-0 and then blow a Game 7 lead and go, they're not gonna, but what if they do? And and Rod Brind'Amour is so friggin' good that you're willing to put your operations on hold for maybe weeks for some of these teams just to see.
Yeah, I hear you. And the bottom line, though, is that he didn't want to go anywhere, and I didn't see any reason. I know you kept trying to talk up Seattle a little bit because of the Ron Francis connection, and that's valid, by the way. It's totally valid. But you know what? At some point in time, you also have to consider, and you just brought it up a little bit, they get swept out of the conference final a year ago. They have a situation where now, again, same kind of concept. They're down 3-0 in a series. They battle back. We're going to get into the series in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But the idea that, and I'll bring it up because, like, right now, while we're talking the coaching news portion anyway, because I even said at some point in time, it can't be the coach anymore with that situation. Not to mention the fact that the previous 2 coaches in franchise history for Carolina are the 2 that are left coaching in the Eastern Conference.
Right.
Like, you've had really good coaches in that franchise for a long time. Maybe it's not good enough at, on the player level to get over the hump. You're close. You're a lot closer than other teams can say they are, for sure. I mean, like, the other team we're about to talk about in a couple minutes that just made another coaching change, right? Like, we're going to get there. But
I almost wonder with Rod and the system he's built in Carolina, I almost wonder if it's too good defensively, and if it doesn't give them enough chances to score goals. Because think about how they went out to Florida. Think about how they went out to the Rangers. Like, they're not giving up 4, 5, 6 goals in most of these games. These are a lot of 2-1, 3-1 with an empty netter, 3-2. Maybe you get a 4-2 with an empty net type of deal.
Overtime games that they're losing in the playoffs.
It's not that their goaltending was bad. I know that, Freddie Anderson faced a lot of scrutiny, and I think he had his moments, but for the most part, he played really well through pretty much all of that series. He kept them in some games.
It's also the regular season argument, though, too, that in the regular season, you can be great and be one of these teams that people start to think, oh, yeah, they're going to be something to be reckoned with when the time comes. And then I won't say they're not, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like, then it gets to the playoffs and something fizzles in some way. It doesn't go the way that you envision it. And that's problematic.
And I almost wonder if these heavy system teams, unless they have the top end elite talent like a Vegas does to just kind of outskill their problems, I wonder if over the course of a series, the other team just kind of has time to figure you out. And I know in the Rangers series, it was a little different because they jumped out to the 3-0 lead and, Carolina had to scramble and blah, blah, blah. But over the course of the series, the Rangers, even though the Rangers lost games 5 and 6, they spent that time figuring out how they were going to beat you in game 7. And that's not a luxury that regular season teams have, because you play a team once and then it's off for the next. So these systems can hold up through the regular season because teams just aren't preparing for you in the same way.
Yeah, probably. I mean, and look, you always end up having a debate about stuff like that when this type of stuff happens, and when you don't make the playoffs, or not don't make the playoffs, don't make a playoff run like you think you're going to, and you don't go as far as you think you are, or especially when you, like we just talked about, you go into the playoffs feeling really good about yourself, feeling like everything's in place, and then something doesn't happen the right way.
Well, speaking of teams that go into the playoffs with everything feeling right, let's touch on Berube here real quick, because Toronto fires Sheldon Keefe. Sheldon Keefe puts out an excellent social media message as far as coach firings go.
That was really cool, actually.
Nice and calm. He's on Lake Ontario. He looks so serene. I saw somebody say he looked like the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders.
Until he takes another job, possibly.
Yeah, but even another job won't have the same scrutiny Toronto did.
It's not going to be Toronto. You're right.
I was going to say, you cannot tell me that Newark has the same scrutiny.
I was about to say,
respectfully.
I was about to say, it seems like there's a possibility that you're going to see a lot more
of Sheldon Keefe. But regardless, so he sends the great message. He's a coaching free agent as it sits right now. Berube gets hired officially in Toronto. So when Brad Treliving came in last year, one of his roster mentality shifts was to attempt to make the team tougher, to add more snot. And they did that by adding Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi and, a couple other players, Joel Edmondson, stuff like that on the defensive side.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's done it behind the bench too, because Sheldon Keefe is a good, skilled X's and O's coach. He's your Mitch Marner. He's your Austin Matthews. Craig Berube's here to be Ryan Reeves.
A little bit. I mean, that introductory press conference said a lot, right, about that. Like, it's about being heavy and what heaviness is to him and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at the St. Louis Blues. Hello.
Sure. Well, look, I wasn't, first of all, definitely the least surprising thing that Sheldon Keefe was gone. I mean, we kind of profiled that from the jump. You know, if they lost that series, then probably that was going to be the end of the line. And then you also have the possibility, then it's about who, if you do that, who do you bring in? And, Berube carried a lot of weight in terms of the coaching free agent class, and
I agree.
It was, let's put it this way. I know that there was a lot made about he's around, he's in Philly a little bit, is there a chance that Tortorella would leave and move to the front office and they would just bring Berube in as the choice? It's not that I didn't see it. It was just one of these things to me where I'm like, you know what? It's just one of these things where he's not going to wait around if another offer comes along. Like if you're sitting here saying, oh, we got to wait a year for this.
Right. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I just don't know. You don't give Jay Woodcroft a call. You don't give Bruce Boudreau a call. You don't.
Boudreau's interesting to me because I don't know if you have to ask yourself whether or not Boudreau even wants it anymore. He's definitely done a lot of TV.
He said that he wants to coach in the NHL. He has said the only assistant coaching job he would take is in Toronto because that's how bad he wants to be on Toronto's bench.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And I look, I don't know about Woodcroft at all. Like, I feel like Woodcroft is, I don't know how much of a fit that would be in Toronto, at least. I think someone, I'm not saying he will go without a job, but
he got some skilled players to win a playoff series or two.
Well, he has, but I think, where I think you're right on with this, though, is that you look at what Berube did with St. Louis in terms of what kind of team he got to win a cup and how they went about that.
Oh, the message in Toronto is changing.
Sure.
Yeah, drastically.
Yeah, I mean, so
this is not Kyle Dubas's team anymore.
Oh, sure. And now you wait to see what the repercussions are for everybody else, because now you've made the most important move off the ice, or at least non-player.
I was going to say, I have a feeling one or both of Marner Tavares is going to go, and that's going to change your roster in a pretty dramatic way.
That's what I mean. Off the ice. That's what I mean by off the ice too. Is like, okay, so you've taken care of the coaching thing. It sounds like, we as much as that we talked about the possibility that would it extend to further parts of the front office, would it extend to Brendan Shanahan? Doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Nope.
So
Shanahan has gotten another bullet.
So, but now you move forward with it's Shanahan and Treliving and Berube, and now what are the repercussions for everybody else? What happens to that team, and what does it look like next year? And who are we talking?
It's going to be fascinating to watch.
I feel like there are, and you even nailed it, because I feel like there are two people I feel safe in talking about, and that would be Matthews and Nylander. I think
and that's it.
They'll move forward with that group, and at that point in time, everything else certainly. Well, I was about to say certainly I don't know about the goaltending, but I actually do think that I think they would have been impressed enough by Joseph Woll that they would say, let's move forward in that direction, and at least there. But then, but defensively, you're asking about Morgan Riley.
I think you're going to hear conversations about Linus Ullmark to Toronto.
It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating because what I'm thinking about is, and again, we'll kind of get into this when we get to the playoff stuff. Ullmark talked about it, and he said, I still have a year left. So it's going to be fascinating. Like, I don't think there's any doubt who the number one guy in Boston is anymore. Don't get me wrong, but it's like,
that's Jeremy Swayman's net.
Yep. But if Ullmark's willing to take a little bit of a reduced role because he just loves it that much,
he may.
He may
on that team. Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, the fact of the matter is that as much as you can look at what happened to the Bruins in this playoff and all stuff like that, you can't deny that they're constantly. I mean, the fact that the Bruins beat Toronto in the first place also to get there, it's like they keep going further than Toronto does with the core that Toronto has. So and think about it. In the course of this, you ripped away two of their core players to begin with before the season even started, and they made up the difference. And then during the playoffs, you took away their captain.
Do you want to dive into this series? You want to just?
I figured we were going to start with the one that. Well, they all ended kind of about the same way, but I just figured we were going to go in order. But we are going to start. I did plan to start in the East, so that is
okay. Fair. Well, then let's just bring this one up then. Since we are talking about the Bruins, it's kind of a bummer because this series kind of felt over after game 4.
Kind of. I know where you're going with this. Yeah,
it felt inevitable, and not in a good way, not in a fun way, but in a way that the last 2 games, even though I think Boston won game 5, did they not?
Yes, they did.
Right.
3-1, then 3-2. And
even though Boston won game 5, it felt like they were just kind of just hanging on. Felt like that was kind of their last push. And yeah, it's a bummer to see because I think if Toronto had gone through, they would have given Florida a little bit of a better matchup, frankly.
So one of the things that really interests me, by the way, about It's going to be this series and then 2 others we're going to talk about before we get to, I guess, the last one of this grouping of 4 that we have to go through before we get to the conference finals. They all almost ended in the exact same way in terms of
very strange 3-1 game 5 win.
Well, beyond that, it's they all the series ended or came close to ending with a last minute goal of some kind or very close to the end. Like you're down to the crunch time where the next goal probably wins it. A lot of this happened, and collectively, you're talking game 6. Boston scored first in game 6, so now you're thinking, oh, here we go. Are they going to do this? Are they going to pull? Or basically, they're going to pull a Toronto and win 5 and 6 to get it to 7, where anything's possible. And sure enough, the thing for me is, and it's funny too, because like the way this series started, I picked Florida,
right,
and I had my doubts after game 1 because it was a straight up drubbing. I mean, Florida got crushed in game 1.
A lot of that was the fact that they'd been sitting for a week and Florida had just, or Boston had just played a game 7.
Because after that, I saw the Florida team I expected. The depth is there. I really, as much as they've got the depth, I'm going to tell you what it really is for me. This team looks like it's on a mission because they're determined to get like everybody called this the revenge series kind of thing. I think the revenge is Florida wants another shot at a Stanley Cup because they felt like they were close last year.
And Matthew Tkachuk doesn't have a broken sternum this time.
Can I tell you something different than about that, to be honest? Matthew Tkachuk played through that injury and was far and away the best player on the team. There are elements where I'm not taking away from him. He got 14 points in the playoffs. I'm not saying that means
he's been great.
Like that he hasn't been like, I'm not saying this means he hasn't been great, but what the difference is to this point, maybe this changes because it certainly picked up for him in game, or not in I won't say it's not a specific game. It was in the conference final. He really against Carolina became like Mr. Clutch. He scored 3 game-winning goals in that series. Yep. So like what I'm getting at is that, yeah, he's got 14 points in the 11 playoff games they've played. He's only got 4 goals. He's not the finisher right now.
No,
not as much. I mean, you think about the other guys on that team.
Bennett.
Bennett's been pretty good at it. Barkov's had a great playoff to this point. Yep. Verhaeghe's got 6 goals. Sam Reinhart's got 5. Like the distribution is everywhere. But like for a time, it felt like there's no way this is going to be, like last season. I'm saying it's like it's always going to come down to, oh, Tkachuk's kind of the guy. And there were other guys, don't get me wrong. Like Verhaeghe had a couple of overtime. Like Verhaeghe's like Mr. Overtime. Tkachuk was
Mr. Overtime.
Tkachuk was like, I'll get it done right before the end of regulation, actually, or eventually he did overtime too. But
yeah.
And what I'm also impressed by is that, during the regular season, it wasn't, their leading goal scorer. It wasn't Tkachuk. It wasn't Barkov. It was, Reinhart was really the goal scorer in the regular season, and he hasn't had to be in the playoffs either. It's like, it's not like it's not like they played 11 games and he's up to 8 or 9 goals. It's 5. And it's like, it's not earth shattering. There's guys with more. There's guys with more,
Yeah.
So what's the deal with that? It's just, how do you equate that? It's a deep, but it's not even, but how do you equate it? It's just a deep team. They've got a lot of sources. And then you really think about when it came down to the clinching game for them, look at the 2 players who did score goals in the clinching game. The game tying goal is Anton Lundell, who scored his 2nd of the playoffs.
Yep.
And the game winner with 1:33 to go, by the way, is Gustav Forsling, who had his
for
2nd.
Boston.
It was that's tough. It is tough.
Heartbreaker.
Because you got the sense that they were in a position where it was certainly possible for them. They had actually realistically played a better 3rd period. They outshot them 9-8. Like, give Florida tons of credit for being the better team during the 2nd period, probably to get the game tied, but Boston was right there. And again, and not to say that Boston didn't have goaltending, but Florida sure does. And it comes down to that too. And I do really like, I saw something really funny, and this is not to try to jump ahead to the conference final portion of this, but somebody asked about something, I guess the difference of being this far in the playoffs, something like that. And Aaron Ekblad said something about, I'm not playing on one foot this time.
And I guarantee
it's the truth, though.
And I guarantee you Matthew Tkachuk would let you know he's feeling better too.
Like, but that's where I was trying to go with that kind of, is that I really like Florida's defensive core. Like, to see Forsling score a game winner that clinches the series, no less, and it doesn't come, how great was Brandon Montour last year that it's like that, and now you've got Ekblad, who seems like he's healthy, and just this whole collection. I really like what they've done, and I feel like they're on, like I said, I feel like they're on a mission, because they got close and they felt like they could have given better in that series.
Something about the state of Florida, man. You just find third liners who score clutch playoff goals.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean,
it just happens, man. You watch the Bolts do it for years.
They still kind of did, even in this year's playoffs. Yep. I mean, you're watching Nick Paul score clutch goals.
Yep.
Brandon Hagel, like, you turn really, sometimes when you do things really well, you turn, a guy who's maybe average on another team into a legitimately really good player.
Oh man, did you just describe Chris Kreider?
Oh, I'm glad you're bringing him up for this series. Let's go for it. Absolutely.
Because that certainly sounds like, you talk about players coming up in a system being built for a team. Tell me Chris Kreider's not built to be a Ranger with a hat trick in Game 6. Third period, come from behind hat trick in Game 6 to absolutely break the spine of the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about a couple of the other things with Carolina, so I don't want to rehash that too much. Yeah. Let's just hit the Rangers here with this, because
they're rolling.
They are really rolling. I mean, and they started. The funny part is that, so again, this is a close series all the way throughout. They win Game 1 by a goal. It's and Carolina made a late push in that too to get it kind of interesting. And then you have these two games back to back that go overtime. One went double overtime. The double overtime game, by the way, is really one of the ones I want to highlight, because I don't think there's only, as far as I know anyway, I think there's only one other example we're going to get to where we've even seen an overtime go to this kind of length.
Yep. Well, in the NHL, I do want to shout out a triple overtime in the PWHL, but it was crazy.
But that's not, but usually by now we've had some kind of wild NHL playoff game that goes really marathon, and because this one didn't, it didn't last. It lasted a decent length into the second overtime, but not. We
weren't
beyond 10 minutes
down for a long overtime. Yeah.
I mean, and Keith Primo was never threatened. Let's put it that way too. There was no threat to that either. I know you want to talk about Kreider for a second. I do want to throw out, because of the fact that this came up with the overtime game anyway, with the double, at least with the double overtime game. And really, I could bring up the other overtime game as well, because he had an assist on the game winner too. But Vinny Trocheck's been a really good player for this team throughout the course of the year. Another one of these guys, like, we've been able to talk about the same 3 or 4 guys for years now with the Rangers, that it's, that it's your Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, top line kind of material. And Panarin doesn't usually always play with them, but you get the point.
Right. Patrick Kane when he was there. Right.
Trocheck filling that second line center spot is really big for them. And he's been a natural fit there. Great face-off guy, can play all situations. And I just think it's big that he's come into his own a little bit. Like, he was, let's also not forget, he was an all-star this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, he might be sneaky, a top 5 second center in the league.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. And for at least a little while, what happened in Game 6 almost happened in Game 4. Game 4, it's 3-1 Carolina after the first period. It looks like they're definitely holding off the elimination that night. And then here come 2 goals and the game's tied. And it took a power play goal late by Carolina to even extend the series. Yep. I give them full marks for the way they played Game 5, because Game 5 was not as close at all. It was actually the most lopsided game of the entire series.
And probably the most dominant game by either team at any point in the series as well.
But man, I mean, we were starting to have discussion, because you were creeping into that territory. Carolina finds a way in Game 4. They win Game 5 rather convincingly.
They're up 3-1
after 2 periods. Yep. And then, like you said, it's the Chris Kreider show. And I think that I've seen people talk about like, and this is valid conversation. I'm not like this is not overblown by any stretch. The way people are talking about Chris Kreider and his impact on the Rangers over the years, he's got a chance to be one of
to climb some lists.
He is. And like, I'm not trying to compare him to the level of a Hall of Famer like Mark Messier was, but he's got a leadership quality about him that I think people gravitate towards. He's been through it. He seems like, we'll get into this as we highlight.
Leading his way into the goal crease for years and years.
He has, but that's a whole nother conversation we're going to get to, I think, after all of the series, because it doesn't relate to one or the other, does it?
Right.
Because really. I definitely want to talk about that, but I do think that like his impact and he, maybe I'm used to it because the number of times that we see the Rangers over the course of a year with, watching all the Flyers games and things like that, he's always been a thorn in the side when it comes to playing the Rangers, so I'm used to seeing this, but it really feels like over the last several years, he has turned into a very key player at playoff time kind of thing. And beyond, honestly, because he's had regular season numbers that have really blown away what he was doing in the regular season before. Like he's turned into that kind of goal scorer in the regular season too. And
you know what? I gotta say, as a Flyers fan, that kind of sucks.
Sure it does. Of course it does. But you get my point. Like he's really turned into that level player. And then they've also got it at a lot of other spots too. I mean, you think about how every year, like for a little while last season, like you brought up the Patrick Kane acquisition that they had, and that had an impact. You're seeing, Jack Roslovic's having an impact this year as a good pickup.
Alexei Lafreniere start to really
he really has come into his own. I will definitely give you that one.
He's really blossoming into a quality NHL player.
When you can space out that level of talent over 3 lines like they do, and I'm not taking anything away from their fourth line, but you know what your fourth line represents most times. Their third line has been right up there with some of these other teams. And honestly, it's one of the fascinating things, and I don't want to jump too far ahead. We'll do the previews probably after we do the other series just to get through them, and then we'll headline the 2 conference finals and give our predictions. But it's one of the things I'm going to be fascinated about in the East final is the depth of both of these teams, and we'll get to it. But
are we going to go to the East final, or do you want to do the recaps out West first?
We can do the recaps first.
Okay, yeah. Then we're going to transition out towards the West here. I think we start in the Central. Let's go with the one that ended first.
Sure.
So, as you can read on our banner here, if you're watching on our YouTube channel at YWT Podcast, the Dallas Stars defeated the Colorado Avalanche in 6 games. This was another series that I was really excited for this series coming in. And it kind of had the wind taken out of the sails right before Game 5. The Colorado Avalanche get news that Valeri Nichushkin has entered Stage 3 of the NHLPA Player Assistance Program, which carries a 6-month minimum suspension. There's a whole bunch that we're not really going to go into on that. We don't really have any details. He's out 6 months. And then on the same day, in the lead up for the same game, Devon Taves is ill and will not be playing Game 5. Now, he ended up coming back and playing Game 6 and looking okay, but Game 5 really took the wind out of the sails for the Colorado Avalanche.
Which is interesting you say that, because they won the game to keep the series alive, but you knew, I think what you're talking about is the way it felt going into that game, where it's like, maybe they're down 3-1 and this happens.
Did that all happen before Game 4 then? I feel like it happened right before our game that they lost.
No. I think it was Game 5, because I think because they came out. That was a really tight game. Game 5 was back and forth. It was like it was.
Don't think it's the same game, because I think the game where all that happened, they had like 3 shots through the first 2 periods.
Let me check. Let me check Game 4 where it was 5-1, because that sounds more
I think that might be the game where it.
Are you talking about when the game may come out and get outshot 16-2 in the first period?
Yeah, that's the one. It was so Game 4. I'm sorry, is when all that news came out. They lost that game to go down 3-1, and it kind of solved the series a little bit for you. It's so difficult to come back from 3-1. We had a bunch of them here. A couple teams threatened to do it. None of the teams actually pulled it off.
Not that kind of comeback. No. So again, the Flyers are safe in that respect as well. Nobody pulled off a reverse sweep or anything like that. I actually think it's fascinating. This one compares to me to the Florida-Boston series a little bit because Colorado gets game one in dramatic fashion. They're down. We had just wrapped the show, I believe.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there talking about, I talked up Dallas in that whole thing there. And I'm like, oh, look, they're up 3-0 or no, I'm sorry. I talked down Dallas a little bit because even though I had them winning the series, I'm like, man, Colorado was really firing on all cylinders. And next thing you know, I look up and it's 3-0 Dallas. I'm like, yeah, all right. That sounds right.
That tracks.
And then here comes Colorado, second period, just finding way, getting it close. They get the game tied. They win it in overtime. A hell of a play by Miles Wood to win it in overtime. Like,
great play.
And I really think that there's a chance that game could have destroyed Dallas's chances. Obviously it didn't. They followed all of that up looking completely every bit like the team I expected them to be for the next 5 games.
They regained every ounce of composure they had and looked like the best team in the West for the rest of the series.
I obviously am still really high on Dallas as this thing moves forward, just because
we'll get into our predictions soon.
Oh, I know.
So
but I'm giving you the reasons based on what I saw in this series. So, I mean, it starts with, Jake Ottinger's looked outstanding. That's where it starts. Miro Heiskanen's killing it in these playoffs.
So good.
And as much as I've been over the core and the transition between your Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Joe Pavelski group and what they have that's on the younger end, I've really got to express how much I love watching Wyatt Johnston play. This kid is incredible at both ends of I'm going to tell you right now, he just turned 21. He's only scratching the surface, and I'm willing to go. So here's how far I'm willing to go with this. I think down the line, I know you have thoughts about one other player on this team that you think could do this, but I think that there's a chance that somewhere down the line, at bare minimum, Wyatt Johnston is going to be a Selke finalist, if not a Selke winner.
He might be a Hart finalist.
He's just been so incredible.
At the age and the play curve we've seen out of Wyatt Johnston.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that kid, we all know that the 2020 draft was a little funky. The 2021 draft was really funky for all sorts of various COVID-related reasons.
Right.
The redraft, Wyatt Johnston's going
right to the top of that list practically.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Speaking of guys who were drafted at the top of their list, we have one more series out west. Mm-hmm. It is the Edmonton Oilers triumphing over the Vancouver Canucks. This was a really fun series. A lot of these games were the Canucks peppering Artur Silovs, Edmonton peppering Artur Silovs, saying no, and Vancouver scoring just enough goals to win a couple games.
Yeah, and I think that eventually caught up to Vancouver not getting enough shot volume.
This run with your third goalie, impressive out of the Vancouver.
I do think it's impressive. So,
and Elias Pettersson, respectfully, did not show up in the slightest.
He did toward the end of the series. The last couple of games, I thought he was probably one of their best players on the ice, honestly. First of all, ironically, the only series I picked to go 7 games or to go 6 games or less than 7, and it goes 7. It was the only one. Every other series I said was going to go 7. They all went 6. This is the one I picked in 6, and it went 7. Look, here's what I'll take, and you'll take it as well because we both had the same teams picked. So I will take 3 out of 4 going to the next round. For a little while, I didn't expect it, to be honest. I was getting a little worried about the Vancouver possibility at one point. So certainly, that's something to consider. The things that I was concerned about with Edmonton are still a concern. It's the defensive depth, the goaltending. They were going back and forth between Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard in this, which that should tell you enough right there. That if you got to go back and forth between pretty much between anybody and Calvin Pickard, you've got a problem right now.
So fun fact.
And Pickard actually didn't play bad.
The Oilers played, and we'll get into our preview here in just a second here, but the Oilers played the Stars 3 times in the regular season. You know how many goals Draisaitl and McDavid had combined across those 3 games?
Against Dallas?
Yep.
Don't tell me it's 1.
It is 0.
Is it really none? Wow.
0.
Were the final scores always 3-0?
Maybe.
Like
I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, basically.
Either way, so let me get to the Vancouver side of this, because obviously they didn't have the services of Thatcher Demko, and that probably contributed to the length of this series. As much as Shelovs was good, totally get it.
You did also lose Brock Besser for game 7.
That was where I was going as well. So they have they got a lot of talented players, and it seemed like they got different guys to step up at different times. But you take a loss at a critical position like your goaltending, and then add in the fact that Brock Besser is lost at the absolute worst time that you could possibly lose a player.
And in case someone hasn't heard, Brock Besser had some blood clotting issues that presented themselves after game 6 or before game 7.
Which is nothing to mess with. So obviously it's understandable why he wasn't able to play.
It very quickly became clear that these were not it was not a life-threatening situation. So that's always good to hear. But obviously he was ruled out for game 7, and then they ended up losing. So it doesn't really matter moving forward.
For what it's worth. So for what it's worth, by the way, they still almost came back in game 7 despite 15 shots on goal. I mean,
because once they started shooting, turns out Stuart Skinner's not very good.
There are no 2 more exciting words in sports than game 7. And
if there are 3, it would be game 7 overtime, and we almost got there.
And this was probably for 50 minutes one of the most boring game 7s you could find.
Yeah, it was.
And then they almost found a way back. I do give Elias Pettersson a lot of marks for how he played in games 6 and 7 in particular. He did look like one of the best players on the team. Obviously, JT Miller had a really strong series and strong playoff. I thought that one of the players who was really showing a good amount of buzz and energy was Connor Garland. He played a really good.
He played a fantastic playoff.
He had a really good season in general, so I got to give him credit for that. But it just was too little, too late. Like that push was too little, too late, and I think if we're gonna shift our attention to the conference finals at some point here, I think we are getting 4 teams that we are not surprised or where they are.
I agree.
Three of them are division winners, by the way.
I was going to say, we almost got all the division winners. If the Canucks had pulled off the comeback in game 7, we would have gone 4-for-4 in division winners for the first time in a long time here.
So do we want to start with these 2 over here?
Well, we're out west. We might as well stay there and then boomerang back.
Start with the West? Okay, let's start with the West.
I think this series comes down to how do the Dallas Stars contain Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl? And remember that stat earlier about the goals they scored in the regular season?
Yep.
Dallas in 6.
Interesting.
That's it. It's that simple for me.
Sometimes I hate doing this show with you.
And it might be 5, frankly.
All right. I appreciate your caveat now, because I was going to say, sometimes I hate doing this show with you because we're just so boring. Because I also have Dallas in 6.
No, I'll go 5. All right,
fine. I've got Dallas in 6. I don't think it's so. Let's start with this. I think the result of this series is a win-win to me, because it's either going to put a very talented core and a deep team in the Dallas Stars in the Stanley Cup.
Or puts the best player in the world in the Stanley Cup final.
And you know this because we've been doing the show long enough, and people who have listened to the show every episode know how I feel about this when we come to playoff time. This is one of my favorite rosters in the league. I've raved about this Dallas Stars roster for a while. Putting them into a Stanley Cup final would be great. Or you're finally going to get Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in a Stanley Cup final.
And ESPN has the Stanley Cup final this year. Like, that's just good for the game, to be honest.
You hope so. I know that there's been a lot of ESPN's coverage.
Well, I assume once you go to the Stanley Cup final, a lot of your games are going to be on ABC. Putting Connor McDavid on ABC. No. Putting Connor McDavid on ABC is good for the game.
Oh, I think it's good for exposure. You just I know what people are criticizing about the coverage is all I'm saying.
No, totally. I totally understand. This is not. I absolutely get that.
Right. No, so what I wonder about most in this series is Edmonton's deficiencies, because when we get to the East series, we can look at the East and say it's pretty even across the board in terms of talent. I don't feel the same way here. I think a lot of people would agree with this. Dallas has the goaltending edge. Both teams have both teams have a young stud on the blue line. Heiskanen's the guy for Dallas. I think Evan Bouchard's had a great playoff for Edmonton, but I think Dallas probably has a little bit more depth there as well. And then I've talked about Dallas's depth up front for a while in terms of
their
the fact
depth up front is ridiculous.
In terms of going from, again, the Benn, Seguin, Pavelski factor, and, consider that you're running out Jason Robertson, Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven, and assuming he's healthy again, Rope Hintz is part of that group as well. And it's like, it's just so good. And I didn't even mention in that veteran core, I didn't even mention the guy who got him there with the overtime winner, Matt Duchene, which, and
did you mention Joe Pavelski?
Yes.
Okay, he's there too.
No, I said Benn, Seguin, Pavelski, and I should throw Duchene in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that even crosses over to the blue line because you got Ryan Suter playing on the blue line and looking pretty good also.
Man, it turns out he was a really good defenseman who is just being overused at every stop he's ever played at.
Yeah, so I'm with you. This is an easy one for me just because I think of all the teams left. Not only is this the roster that I love the most, but I think this is the team that has found their groove the most so far.
Is Wyatt Johnston the third best forward in this series?
Behind the obvious two.
Of course, behind two of the three best players in the world. Yeah. I think he might be.
Based on, let's put this way.
I'm not taking anything away from Zach Hyman, but come on, Zach. How many of those 53 goals were because of Connor and Leon? Come on.
Well, Hyman's leading the league in goals in the playoffs too.
And who? I'm sorry, who's leading the league in points though?
In the lead in the playoffs in points?
Yeah, not goals, but points.
Leon Draisaitl.
Oh, okay. And who's second?
Connor McDavid.
Oh, okay, great. So that's how Zach Hyman has his goals. Got it.
Oh, I hear you. It's the conversation that you're trying to have. By the way, It's always been like Johnston keeps rising up the ranks. I will definitely give you that. It's really close for me with him and Robertson because I really have loved Robertson. But
then Dallas has the third, fourth, and you can argue maybe fifth and sixth best forwards in the series before you get to another Edmonton forward.
I think by that point I'm putting Hyman in the ranks somewhere.
Okay, no, it's not crazy, but you got Johnston there, you got Robertson there. And then on any given night, you got a Rope Hintz, you got a Tyler Seguin, you got any of these other guys.
Sure.
I think this is going to be a really good series.
I do too. Absolutely.
I think Edmonton has a chance to steal more than one game.
Well, that's why I went 6. Exactly.
I think you need Connor McDavid to go crazy, and it needs to also be a night that Stuart Skinner doesn't go crazy.
I like how you put that.
And if those things happen, you can win 2 games. I don't think that's going to happen 4 times in 6 games or 7 games against this Dallas team.
I'm going to tell you right now, based on what you just said, if you're having the same discussion that you just had against Vancouver, where it's who's in goal for the Edmonton Oilers at any point during this series, it's over.
Correct.
Like, it better be Stuart Skinner is that good, or it's not going to happen.
Or he's hurt and you have to go to the other guy. Right. That is the only conversation you're allowed to have.
Because, and this is the hard part, right? Because, okay, I as much as I love Jason Robertson, Wyatt Johnston's been the best forward on Dallas in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And he might come in third in the Conn Smythe if you had to pick a Dallas Star, because I think that Heiskanen and Ottinger are both higher in the ranks. And Ottinger to me is the biggest difference maker between the two teams. Like I said, you can pull, if you're looking at Heiskanen, you can say Bouchard is maybe in the same class in some way. I think Heiskanen is better, but you get the point. And certainly, I don't think again, as much as I love Johnston and Robertson and all that stuff like that, you cannot put them in the stratosphere that Draisaitl and McDavid are in.
No,
you can't. No. So Edmonton's got the forwards, at least the top 2, and it's I don't want to call it a push, but I don't think it's as extreme of a gap between top defensemen as it could be. But it is a very extreme gap in goaltending.
Well, I also think it's an extreme gap in goaltending or in defenders 2 through 6.
Oh, that part I agree with, and that's where depth matters. Because let me throw out another stat for you. I know we don't love using this like as an end all be all or whatever. But do you know who's tied for second in plus minus in the playoffs this year?
Who's that?
Chris Tanev, who they acquired at the deadline.
Yeah.
Don't forget about guys like that too, who you had to bring into the picture, and don't get me wrong, like you go in there and Evan Bouchard's a +10 and Matthias Ekholm's a +8, and totally get it. And there's a way to be that way when you've got Hyman and McDavid and Draisaitl putting up points and you just happen to be there. Bouchard's a good point. Like, don't get me wrong. Bouchard's a good points guy too. Bouchard's actually got 15. He's third in the league in the playoffs with 15 assists.
He probably should have gotten a little more consideration for the Norris this year.
I think he will eventually. I think
that's a legacy award as much as anything.
Yeah. Right. Well, as much as it's legacy, the guy who's going to win it is probably, is not going to have as much experience as other guys either.
That is true.
It's going to be a guy that they just beat.
Unless they just give it to Erik Karlsson again, because why not?
Was he a finalist?
No, I'm joking.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I could see it if it was like, because I think Yossi got a lot of attention this year. And it's like, if it's legacy, then sure, that's probably the direction you go. But I'm pretty sure it's Quinn Hughes to lose.
Yes. All right. And then we do have one more matchup here to talk about. That is the Eastern Conference Final. And if you've been paying attention here, you know who's there. Yes. The Rangers are playing the Panthers. Game 1 is in Madison Square Garden on Wednesday night. It's going to be a really good series. And I fully expect these two teams to beat the piss out of each other, frankly.
Sure. I said that Florida's probably out for revenge this postseason, and I believe that it's kind of interesting. They haven't run into a ton of adversity. Like last season, they put so much into that first round series against Boston. This year, they made really quick work of Tampa, which I was surprised by. And
me too.
And as long as the Boston series did go this year to go 6 games still, they were the better team and played like it. So I don't really feel like there was a lot of adversity here. And that's why for me, I have this series going 7, because the Rangers have not had that President's Trophy downfall that we've gotten used to seeing in the earlier rounds sometimes. They've got all the pieces that go along with it. This is an elite goalie matchup between Shesterkin and Bobrovsky. There's quality defensemen on both sides. We talked about a little bit with Florida's side of things, where it's Montour, Ekblad, Forsling. You got a good group up with that. And then you go to the Rangers side, and it's Adam Fox and what you've seen from, the warrior that Ryan Lindgren is, and what you've seen from Keandre Miller and guys like that too. Like, this is a really good series in that regard. And then forwards, it's the same way, right? Like, both teams are loaded at forward with potential goal scoring and talent and all that.
Yes.
It's even an excellent, it's like one of the best coaching matchups you could ask for. You got Peter Laviolette and Paul Maurice.
Yeah.
Paul Maurice has turned into a little bit of a rock star lately with some of the press conferences, by the way. That's been some real.
Paul Maurice is always a press conference god.
Paul Maurice is like the more charming John Tortorella, where it's like he says it, but it's got a little bit more charm behind it and a little bit less like vitriol. Like
it's the goatee. He doesn't have the goatee.
By the end of the season, it was a full-on beard, but I get your point.
No, but it's very specifically the goatee. People respond strongly.
I think it's the fact that you look at Paul Maurice and in between the glasses and all that type of stuff, it's like you can just like, it's one of these guys, like you're sitting there and he has this look like, I'm smarter than you and you all know it.
Well, and he's been a head coach since he was like 28, so he's been around forever. He's been a head coach since the Hartford Whalers existed. Hello?
Yeah, for real. This is going to be a heavyweight fight to me, and I'll say what I always say. If it's a 7-game series to me, I'm not going to be surprised if either team wins. I am taking Florida, though. I've got Florida making the return to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, see, you set it up right, but you gave the wrong answer.
Oh, we're going to be different this time. I like it.
If this is a heavyweight fight,
yeah,
and it's Madison Square Garden Game 7, the home team's not losing.
I understand where you're coming from with it.
The game might go to 17 overtimes. The home team's not losing that one. Nope. I think the Rangers are a better team.
Okay.
I think man. Okay, so I think the Rangers are a better hockey team.
Yes.
The Florida Panthers might be a better playoff hockey team.
Interesting.
And I think that is where the rub in this series lies. I think if they played 15 to 20 regular season games, the New York Rangers would win 12 of them. But in a 7-game playoff series where especially the Eastern Conference Finals, where you're committing homicide to get calls here at this point, I think there is a chance that the Panthers grind it out, and I have similar feelings to you, where if it goes Game 7, anything can kind of happen. But I do think the Rangers are going to win it. I'm going to say 7.
Okay.
But I could easily see it being less than 7 if the Rangers come out and win the first 2 games at home and smell blood, series might not go past 5.
Fair. I don't see it. The part of the reason I don't see it that way is because Florida has laughed in the face of like the home ice thing always.
I agree.
They don't seem to care. Think about what just happened too. It's Game 6. The Bruins are out trying to find a way to get that thing to 7. It's TD Garden in the playoffs, and
oh yeah, I don't feel confident about this. Matthew Tkachuk's going to shove it right in my face. I certainly know that, but at this point, you got to pick a team, and I keep thinking in my head that the Rangers are phonies, and they keep not being phonies, man. Like,
yeah. I will admit, so I will agree with you on that part, because what I will say is that I didn't have the Rangers getting here, and it was really hard. It's why I went 7 to begin with, is because it was really hard for me to pick against them, because they do feel like they've got it all figured out.
They look like the Eastern Conference version of Dallas.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I get it.
Like,
I totally get it. So I want to mention 2 quick things before we get to wrap that kind of tie into this. So first, this is a super quick footnote, but I love stuff like this, and I do this every year. Somebody's decent length playoff drought or cup drought is coming to this year.
Yeah,
the 4 teams you have left are
the most recent cup was Dallas in 99.
99. So you do not even have a Stanley Cup winner. You didn't even have a Stanley Cup in the 2000s yet in this current century.
A repeat champion currently still remaining, right?
Correct.
And on that note, since we're doing weird history notes, if the New York Rangers win the Stanley Cup, Peter Laviolette will become only the 4th coach ever to win cups with multiple franchises.
Interesting. Okay. 30th anniversary, by the way.
You won't know who the other 2 are, but can you give me the one? He actually won with 3 different franchises.
Head coaches that won with multiple franchises.
Yep.
Well, one's obvious. I'm going to turn and look at his name on the wall over here, because I got a puck signed by him over here. It's Scotty Bowman.
And he is the only one you're going to know. The others were in the 30s and 40s. So
it's probably like, what is it?
Don't worry about it.
Are we going back as far as like Dick Irvin? And
I believe Dick Irvin is one of them. Yes.
You're shocked that I just pulled that out.
Absolutely, I am. Yep. That's a good one. I don't remember the other one.
You were surprised I even got that.
You caught me for a second. Yeah, I was like, wait a minute.
I knew Scotty Bowman off the top for sure, because Scotty Bowman goes back to Montreal, Pittsburgh, and Detroit, and at very different times in the where the game was too. Like,
and the last one from Scotty Bowman is the last time that a coach has done that. So Peter Laviolette, if they win, could be the first. Obviously, his last cup was in Carolina, the team he just got through.
Well, it's not for a lack of knocking on the door, because he's gotten to cup finals with 2 more teams before this. If he were to have it with the Rangers too,
and it's crazy when you think about it like that only 3 coaches have done it, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's had opportunities. Yep. It's pretty crazy. Yep. You also have to factor in, so you've got the Dallas fact. So Dallas is 25 years. The Rangers are 30 years. You do still you've got a team that's never won it before still in the running.
That's the Panthers.
And you have 1 Canadian team still remaining for the Canada drought, which is
now 89 from them.
90 was 90, Edmonton's last, but we're really playing
Canada's
off of
last was 92.
93.
Right.
93.
I'm sorry.
Yes. So we're playing off of that one. So you got a lot of fun possibilities here.
Absolutely.
A lot of fun possibilities. There were some, I will say this. I do know that there were people before that game 7 between Vancouver and Edmonton that were like holding on to the fact that we could have had a Rangers Vancouver final and repeated 1994.
That would have been
which I'll admit, because you know this. My preseason,
somebody called Mark Messier.
Well, it's not going to be hard. Go to ESPN.
I know.
Which, by the way, the documentary that they teased looks really good. I'm going to have to check that out. I
still have to watch Saving Sakic, but
yeah, I do too. I haven't had a lot of like spare time to do that right now. I had from the beginning of the season, my preseason prediction was a rematch of 2000.
Okay.
And that's obviously not possible, but certainly, we had a couple of different rematches on the table as long as this was going, because you had Carolina Edmonton from 2006 was on the table. You did have that Ranger Vancouver one on the table. You had a few others that were kind of linked throughout and things like that. Would just, now there's no real historic matchup here. You're just going to get either one of these anniversaries or one of these like legendary kind of like, hey, how long has it been since Canada won a cup? How long, Florida's never won a cup.
The Rangers,
right? 30 years for the Rangers, 25 years for Dallas. Somebody's breaking this thing, and that's great.
One fan base is about to be very, very happy.
So really quick, the other thing I wanted to bring up, because it kind of is a broad spectrum kind of topic, was the goalie interference stuff, and the officiating and all that stuff. Because it's come up more times than it should. It's come up more times than it should in a negative way. And I actually, so, I saw, look, I know what was going on in the Florida-Boston series and the goalie interference calls that were kind of all over the place and things like that. And then we got to the Dallas-Colorado game 6. And, I don't know when screening became illegal, to screen a goalie, and that means he can't play his position anymore kind of thing. Like,
yeah, there's some questionable decisions in that one. Wow.
But what I think happened, and I don't like trying to get into conversations about this stuff. I know stuff happens over the playoffs, things like that, and it's, and sure, is there a distinct like level of possibility where it looked like something was happening on that call, and if you count that Dallas goal on the ice, it probably stands, and then you're sitting there looking at this going, that's how the series ends. Like, I know that comes into play. I get that comes into play. I watched as the intermission report happened, because by that point an overtime goal was waved off. Call stood, obviously, because there wasn't anything that was really going to overturn what they called on the ice based on that. And they get to the intermission to go to the second overtime. And I just thought that, you can have your opinions on Paul Bissonnette and, all the other stuff that goes on. However, he was spot on during that intermission, and he really had, I totally, it was a great panel to have that night for it, because Biz was just going spot on with everything he was saying. You had a goalie on the panel,
pretty good goalie too,
right? Hall of Fame level goalie, right? Henrik Lundqvist, who is trying to give the goalie's perspective of it. By the way, agreed with Biz that the goalie should have to be a little bit more forward and kind of assert himself a little more to establish position. Agreed with that, which is big from a goalie, instead of being like the victim of, no, this is my crease. That's the only way there is to it. No. He agreed with that. But what Biz said that I felt was right is the biggest problem is consistency. We still do not know what
there's no standard. There's no
standard. And honestly, it goes beyond goalie interference, because we don't know what goalie interference is. We don't know what a ton of other penalties really are, or what should be called or what's not, and all that type of stuff. And it just becomes a big blemish on the game that you keep having to have this conversation that we keep thinking about. Like, imagine if Dallas doesn't win that game. And even though they did, it was probably still a big enough talking point. But imagine if Dallas doesn't win that game, and we got a game 7 out of that series, and they look like they should have been awarded a goal on that first play.
Right.
That's all we're talking about until game 7, until that series is over. And if Dallas doesn't win the series in game 7, if it goes that far like that, we're still talking about it, because we're going to sit there and say they were robbed of that goal because of what it looked like.
Absolutely.
And the inconsistency of it. it is the one thing I think the NHL needs to address is you got to make this as cut and dry as possible. And I understand it's not always perfect, but you've got to do as much as you can to do that.
You know why they're not going to do that?
Because everything else factors.
Because if you set a standard, people are going to hold you to it. If there is no standard, then you can do whatever you want
and hide behind it. Sure.
Yep.
Well, but what people keep coming back to, and this is a fair counterpoint to what the league has may want to say about it, is when you factor in all of the other stuff from fan experience of being able to enjoy the game and feeling like you know something about the game, like everybody questions what goalie interference is. The officials probably don't really know as well as they should. Certainly the fans watching don't know. The players don't really know. I was
going to say, half the time the players don't seem to know.
Right. But and you shouldn't be able to, it's the playoffs. You shouldn't be able to stop a player. Like I said, what are we supposed to do? Put a 5-foot buffer around the crease and say, don't go in there.
Right.
And I ironically enough, I kind of laugh about it because I'm like, of all teams for something like this to be happening to in that situation, Dallas only won a cup in the most controversial fashion.
Right, they know all about crease rules.
By the way, you can see it on the screen. It is over here.
Okay.
It's up there, and the picture, by the way, when I look at that picture, it is clear as day. His foot is in the crease and the puck is not.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, that wasn't that was a rule at the time.
It was, but it wasn't, and it was.
And eventually it became a big time rule, and everybody talked about no goal then. And so, but now what I'm saying is that so that changed the way that you did, situations around the crease in that setting when that happened. I think about however many years ago it was that Erik Karlsson scored in the playoffs for San Jose off of a hand pass, and they later changed that for a missed stoppage challenge because you couldn't as much as that counted then, you couldn't go forward letting something like that count anymore.
Same way the Blues got screwed at the end of a playoff game because I think the puck hit off the net. It was against Boston in the Stanley Cup final in 2019. The puck hit off the net and kind of skittered out in front, and St. Louis took their foot off the gas because the puck had bounced off the net. Boston scored and ended up getting challenged later where that could be reviewed. Yeah.
Is that I don't know if I remember exactly that one, but there was another
because I remember Braden Shen and Torrey Krug chasing an official off the ice, smacking their sticks against, it was bad. I thought a referee was about to get jumped.
And somehow or other, that was hardly the most controversial call in that series.
No kidding.
There was a missed penalty later on in that series that was led directly to a goal, and you knew it was coming.
And there was another rule change that came out of this series because that's the series that gave us Torrey Krug in the helmet rule.
Yeah, it's true. I was even thinking about I was even thinking about and this wasn't an out of play situation, but remember when Vancouver made the Cup final and the puck hit the stanchion and nobody had a clue where it was, and you have the same concept. You have people standing around going, "Oh, it got to be out of play." Nope, it's not. But and things. By the way the puck went in on that situation was very similar. By the way, everybody's looking the other way, and it's like, oh, by the way, the puck's over here and it's in.
Yep.
Ironic, by the way, how the puck doesn't lie, and the guy who was screening the goalie at the time that they basically called for the contact got the game winner anyway. Crazy. Love when that happens, right? So,
all right,
you get my point.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that is just about going to do it for today. We do have one more little note here on the closing of Cabrini College. Just a bit of a minor note. I know we've mentioned that Kevin's gone back and done some stuff with their radio in the past and got a little bit going on. And it happened this week. And Kylie Kelsey gave the commencement. I'm sure most of you saw it.
It's been posted pretty much everywhere. I mean, the amount of news outlets that have picked up on. I mean, People Magazine picked up on it. I saw it. Things like that. It's
wild. The Kelsey effect is real.
But by the way, I didn't find this out until today, and it's been a couple days since everything, the commencements. She was not at the Legacy event, by the way. Later, she did the commencement in the morning, and I think, stepped away after that and things like that. Let's be real, they got 3 kids too. So
she's a busy mom. She's got things to do.
Beyond being a mom too, she's just a rock star in general with all this other stuff or whatever. But
absolutely
a ton of different things that she's involved with, let alone what he's involved with. By the way, I share something in common with Jason Kelsey now officially. We both work for a platform that has the same call letters.
Oh, there you go.
He's joining Monday Night Football, right? So
yeah, exactly.
But
it's 1 degree of separation.
But so to go back to Sunday though, bittersweet day to kind of be there and and whatever. So it was funny because I tweeted during the course of the morning as all the Michkov stuff was swirling around. I'm like, this is either going to be the best day to be off of social media or the worst. It's going to be one or the other.
And
it ended up working out because nothing else came out. Like nothing else came out. Like, well, and that was the whole point, right? Like it's either going to be the worst day because something's going to happen and I'm going to be out and about and not seeing it, or it's going to be the best because other people are going to possibly take this
here reading all the garbage,
and I don't need to read about all that, right? Like it's let it play out. But it was definitely, bittersweet day to be there and like, kind of know everything is finished and things
closing
like
up.
that.
Yeah.
It's closed. Like it's not over by any stretch. There's let's just say I didn't even realize this. They brought up that over the course of and it's just like, let's be real. It was a small college. They didn't have like the enrollment numbers that a Temple would have or something like that.
Sure.
Ever. So they still said over the course of the 67 years of graduates and all that, so they had 17,000 alums from the school, and you don't like it puts it in perspective when you're one of them. You know what I mean?
Of course.
It's when you're one of a number like 17,000 at a place like that, and that's what's going to carry on wherever it goes and things like that. And
shout out to Cabrini alums.
So naturally, I'll move the microphone out of the way a little bit just to show.
Shout out to Cabrini alums. Start getting used to telling people that your school used to exist, and start getting used to explaining that whole thing when people ask you where you went to school. So,
I mean, it just is what it is. I believe it or not, the sad part about it is that more people, obviously, and you brought it up, obviously, because let's face it, she's probably one of the most famous alums out there from it. More people actually knew about it because of Kylie and the idea that. Well, and her story is fascinating enough as it is because like she had gone to a community college before going to Cabrini, and she was technically a freshman when I was a senior, even though we're only like a year apart in age or something like that. But it was just it's a trip every time you see her at like the freaking Super Bowl or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that, like. You only married a future Hall of Famer in the NFL, and your brother-in-law is not bad, and your brother-in-law is not bad either.
And you're a diehard Eagles fan, and you married a guy who stayed in Philadelphia his entire career, like that, and has become one of the most beloved players in franchise history.
And I'm telling you right now, they will not be leaving. That's the other thing too.
Oh like, no,
they are
no
intertwined with this. He is as much for all the stuff about Cleveland Heights and all that stuff. Like what I mean. Like he is intertwined to this area like nobody else, and it feels like, and they are like the first family of Philadelphia.
If he wanted to move back to Cleveland, she would divorce him and keep the house.
I'm not going to go that far with it. I know her. I'm not going that far.
No, that's fair. All right, we are going to get out of here.
Thank you for the shout out and all that stuff like that. I appreciate it. I'm not going as heavy on this in the future. It was just
of course
right now while it was fresh, while it was what was fresh. I'm actually it was good. I'm glad that. Like we were trying to talk about when we were going to do this. I was worried for a second that the only day to do this was going to be Sunday. And I'm like,
we made it work.
I would really I was just sitting there going, I would really hope that it wasn't like we got to try to fit this into the morning. Cause I have to get to that. Obviously It was very important for me to get there and things like that. So.
Well, we're glad you got that taken care of. And all right, we will be back in 2 weeks to discuss the conference finals as well as the Stanley Cup final. There may be some other things in between.
There may be some other news too. We'll see.
There may be some Russian kid. There may be some trades. You never know. There was Ryan McDonough's back in Tampa. That doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, that came from out of nowhere, really, right?
No, for a couple of draft picks. Very strange move. We will be here to talk about the Stanley Cup final, any other moves that happen. We're starting to gear towards the draft a little bit. In the meantime, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow the podcast anywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Find Kevin at Kevin_Durso. And I think that'll do it for us today. So until next time, we'll see you. Philly's the best team in baseball.